she was born special, with two hearts inside her body. Before we continue, please remember to like, share and subscribe. The hospital room was cloaked in an eerie kind of silence, the kind that hovers when hope has been traded for desperation. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly overhead, casting a pale sheen across the faces of the doctors and nurses who moved with brisk purpose. On the delivery bed, a woman lay exhausted, her eyes not filled with joy, but with something far more complicated. Beside her, her husband stood stiffly, hands clenched, as if bracing for impact. Then, the cry came. A baby girl had entered the world, small, soft, and utterly extraordinary. As the doctors checked her vitals, something unusual caught their attention. Her heartbeats, there were two. Two distinct rhythms pulsing from within her tiny chest. The room, once tense, now buzzed with astonishment. "She has two hearts," a nurse whispered, wide-eyed. The lead doctor nodded slowly, stunned. Two fully functional hearts. It's unheard of. But while the medical staff were in awe, the baby's parents did not share their wonder. There was no weeping of joy, no embraces of relief. Instead, they exchanged a look, quiet, calculated. It wasn't happiness etched on their faces. It was resignation. Because this birth wasn't a miracle to them. It was a mission. The narration cuts in, solemn and steady. This child, this girl with a rare, life-defying condition, was not conceived out of love, or the hope of new beginnings. She was created to save someone else. Her older sister, barely clinging to life, suffered from a congenital heart defect. The prognosis was grim. No donor had been found. Time was running out. So the parents made a choice. They rolled the dice with science, chance, and biology. And they won. But the child, this second daughter, was never meant to be someone of her own. From the moment she was conceived, she was a backup plan, a biological safeguard. Her body was a potential cure. Her life was a means to another's survival. As the doctor swaddled the infant and handed her to the mother, the woman barely looked down. She stared at the child like one might stare at a complex puzzle, something strange, something useful, something burdened with silent expectations. Outside the room, her older sister lay in the pediatric cardiac unit, barely breathing. The hospital floors buzzed with machines and hushed conversations, but the atmosphere remained heavy, haunted by choices that blurred the line between compassion and calculation. The baby's name was never whispered with affection. There were no lullabies, no promises of love. Only test results, silent prayers for compatibility, and the unspoken truth that her future would never truly belong to her. Her childhood unfolded like a quiet echo, always present, but never quite heard. From her earliest memories, she was the one standing just outside the circle. At birthday parties, her sister wore the glittering tiara, the one that shimmered in every camera flash. She, meanwhile, held the plates or passed the gifts, smiling on cue, though no one ever asked if she wanted to blow out the candles too. The house was full of laughter, but none of it seemed directed her way. Her sister was fragile. Delicate as porcelain and just as precious. Her heart condition meant endless hospital visits, quiet days with caregivers, and a room filled with soft beeping machines. And while her sister was surrounded by warmth, attention, and whispered reassurances, she was met with cool efficiency. Doctors glanced at her like a checklist. Nurses smiled, but only briefly. They all knew her name, not because they cared, but because of what she was, insurance. Her parents were not unkind, but they were distant. Their attention, their worry, their love, everything centered on the child who might not make it. She understood the gravity of her sister's condition, but still, it left her feeling like a shadow cast by someone else's suffering. She worked hard to matter. In school, she excelled, first in class, perfect attendance, quiet and obedient. She brought home report cards that glowed with praise, hoping they might earn her even a flicker of pride from her parents. Sometimes her mother would glance up and say, "That's good, sweetheart," before rushing to prepare her sister's medication. Her father rarely looked away from the phone. She offered to help around the house, sat with her sister during bad nights, even learned to read medical books so she could understand what was happening. Still, the warmth she longed for never came. Then, one afternoon changed everything. She was walking down the hallway, meant to bring her mother a folder left on the kitchen table. As she approached the room, she heard voices, her parents hushed and serious. She paused, not meaning to eavesdrop, but the words stopped her cold. "She's healthy, strong. If it gets worse, we still have options. That's why we had her." Silence. Then her mother's voice, weary but resolute, "I just hope she never finds out. She's so sweet." She didn't breathe. The folder slipped from her hand, unnoticed. Her legs moved before her mind did. She stumbled back to her room, shut the door, and sat on the floor, heart pounding, not one, but two, echoing against her ribs like a cruel reminder. She had always suspected it. Why else did love feel like something earned, never given? But hearing it confirmed made everything sharp. Her existence wasn't an accident or a miracle. It was a contingency plan. From that day on, the world didn't look the same. Her smiles became quieter, her eyes sharper. She was no longer just the spare. She was the girl born to be used. By the time she reached her early 20s, she had mastered the art of invisibility. University life offered her a kind of freedom, but it was colored by emotional exhaustion. She moved through her days quietly, attending lectures, working shifts at the campus bookstore, and keeping her world small. Years of feeling like an afterthought had dulled her ability to trust, to hope, to expect anything more from life than what had already been carved out for her. Then she met Alec. It was nothing remarkable at first. He was just another customer in the bookstore, thumbing through poetry collections and smiling at his own thoughts. But unlike others, he didn't overlook her. He returned the small smile she gave while ringing up his purchase. And the next day, he came back. Their conversation started simply, books, lectures, the chaos of college life, but something about him was different. He listened. Not just politely, but fully. When she spoke, he held her gaze like her words carried weight. She found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone, about her love for stargazing, the way music made her feel less alone, how she sometimes felt like a ghost in her own family. He never flinched. He never asked too much. He just stayed. Over time, Alec became the anchor she never knew she needed. He'd show up after her shifts with coffee, walk her home in silence when words felt too heavy, and never once asked her to explain the sadness behind her smile. For the first time, she felt seen, not as someone useful, not as a safety net, but as herself. One evening, the sky opened up just as they were walking through the campus courtyard. The rain fell hard and sudden, sending students running for cover. She pulled up her hood, ready to bolt. But Alec grabbed her hand and grinned. "Dance with me." She laughed, almost embarrassed. "Are you serious?" "Completely," he said. "This moment doesn't need shelter." Before she could protest again, he spun her gently under the streetlight. The rain soaked their clothes and clung to their skin, but it didn't matter. There was something magical about it, just the two of them, caught in a moment outside of time. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, vulnerable. He leaned close and whispered, "You're not just someone's second chance. You're a first choice." That night changed everything. It was the first time her heart, both of them, fluttered not in fear, but in something terrifyingly beautiful, hope. With Alec, she didn't feel like a spare. She felt wanted. Chosen. For once, she wasn't living in the shadow of someone else's need. And though part of her was still cautious, still bruised, she let herself believe, if only for a while, that maybe, just maybe, she could finally be loved for who she truly was. The wedding was everything she thought she wanted, small, quiet, and deeply personal. It wasn't about the grandeur or the spectacle. It was about the feeling of being chosen, finally, wholly. She stood under a modest arch of soft flowers, wearing a simple ivory dress that flowed with understated grace. Alec stood beside her, beaming with pride. His eyes locked onto hers as if she were the only person in the world. For the first time, she felt like she belonged in a moment not defined by someone else's need. Friends and a few family members gathered in the candlelit garden, their soft applause and teary smiles casting a warm ambience. Everything should have felt perfect. But one detail unsettled her, a woman standing near the back, older, elegantly dressed, and unfamiliar. She watched with an unreadable expression, something between sadness and warning. Her eyes lingered too long. Later, during the quiet hum of the evening reception, the woman approached. "I'm Margaret," she said gently. "Alec's aunt." Before she could say more, Alec appeared at her side, too quickly. "Aunt Margaret, we'll talk later," he interrupted with a tense smile, guiding his new bride away with a firm hand on her back. She felt the tension ripple beneath his charm but dismissed it. Families were complicated, after all. They returned home to the small apartment Alec had filled with thoughtful touches, bookshelves lined with her favorite novels, a framed photo from their first date, warm lights glowing softly overhead. She told herself this was what happiness looked like. But within days, things began to shift. Alec became more distracted, stepping out to take phone calls in hushed tones, locking his study door when he never had before. His laughter no longer came as easily, and his eyes often avoided hers when she asked simple questions. One evening, she received an email from her university clinic, a security notification. Her private medical file had been accessed. Confused, she clicked through the alert. It had been opened under a hospital administrator's login from a different facility, one she had never visited. Her heart sank. She had never told Alec about her condition. Not the full truth. Not the part about having two hearts. It was something she had shared with only a handful of doctors and buried under layers of pain and shame. She had trusted that this love would see her, not her rarity. When she asked Alec if he'd ever looked into her medical history, his response was measured, almost too controlled. "Of course not," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Why would I?" She wanted to believe him. She needed to. So she convinced herself the notification was an error, a glitch in the system. She tucked away the unease and buried it under the memories of their vows. But something inside her, a quiet, long-neglected instinct, began to stir. Because love, she'd learned, was not always what it seemed. And not every warning comes with raised voices. Some arrive in silence. It began with a simple task, sorting through a stack of papers in Alec's study. The room was quiet, the air still. She had offered to help organize his files while he worked late. It felt like a small, loving gesture, something wives did, proof, in some way, that she was part of his world. The desk drawers creaked open one by one, filled with mundane folders, insurance papers, receipts, work notes. Nothing unusual. Until she found the one at the back, unlabeled, tucked beneath a stack of outdated documents. It didn't belong. Her curiosity was innocent at first. But as she opened the folder and began to read, the blood drained from her face. Inside were pages of medical reports, her own. Copies of her diagnostic scans, her rare condition, the confirmation of her two hearts. Next came email threads with doctors, transplant specialists, genetic consultants. The dates on the correspondence struck her like thunder. They were from months before Alec had ever spoken to her. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. One email stood out. A conversation between Alec and a transplant coordinator. The subject line made her stomach churn. Potential match identified, uncommon dual cardiac structure. It was her. He had known. From the beginning. The love story she had clung to, built her trust upon, was a lie. Every tender moment, every quiet whisper, every dance in the rain, it was all a careful performance. Her vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. Her breath quickened, heart pounding, or maybe both of them were. She wasn't sure anymore. She stumbled from the study, folder in hand, her chest burning with betrayal. The door opened behind her as Alec returned home. He saw her standing there, broken, furious, exposed. She held the folder out like a weapon. "How long?" Her voice cracked. "How long have you known?" He looked at her, face pale, lips parted. He didn't deny it. "I had no choice," he said softly. "She's my sister. She's dying." His voice was almost pleading, as if that made it better. But it didn't. "What about me?" she cried. "What was I to you? Just a match? A resource? A walking donation?" "I never wanted it to be this way," he said. "But once I got to know you, things changed." She backed away, shaking her head, as if distance could undo what had just shattered. "You found me. You courted me. You married me, all for this." She looked at him one last time, and in that moment, the world she had built in her heart crumbled completely. She turned and walked out the door, not bothering to pack a bag. That night, the woman with two hearts finally felt the truth of both breaking at once. And neither one would ever beat the same again. The motel room was small and dim, with peeling wallpaper and a flickering ceiling fan that hummed like a broken lullaby. It wasn't much, but it was far away, far from Alec's lies, her parents' cold calculations, and the weight of being everyone's savior except her own. She hadn't cried since she left, but now, alone with silence as her only companion, the dam broke. She curled up on the thin mattress, knees to chest, as sobs racked her body. Images flashed behind her eyes, her mother's distant hugs, her father's empty praise, the whisper of "that's why we had her." Then came Alec's voice, gentle but hollow, echoing in her ears, "She's my sister. I had no choice." Two hearts thundered in her chest, but she felt emptier than she ever had. It was cruel, she thought, having two of something so symbolic of love and yet feeling as if she had never truly been loved at all. Her whole life had been a transaction, an offering. Not a childhood. Not a marriage. A sentence. She lay there for hours, staring at the cracks in the ceiling like they might split open and swallow her whole. But they didn't. What came instead was a quieter kind of reckoning. A stillness that followed the storm. Her tears dried, her breathing slowed. Something had shifted, not erased the pain, but sharpened it into clarity. She wasn't the problem. She never was. The next morning, she took a long bus ride home, not to Alec's apartment, and certainly not to her parents' house, but to someone she hadn't seen in years, Dr. Lillian Sato, the pediatric cardiologist who had diagnosed her as a newborn. The woman's face softened with recognition and concern as she walked into the clinic. They sat in a quiet office surrounded by charts and children's drawings. Dr. Sato listened patiently as she poured everything out, her childhood, the truth she overheard, Alec's deception. When she finished, her voice barely a whisper, the doctor reached out gently and said, "You are not anyone's property. Your body is yours. Your life is yours. You were born extraordinary, but that doesn't mean you owe anyone anything." The words settled in her like seeds finding soil. That night, back at the motel, she stood before the bathroom mirror. Her reflection stared back, tired, tear-stained, but present. She studied herself with fresh eyes, really seeing the woman behind the wounds. Slowly, she placed her hand over her chest. "I was born for me," she whispered. It was the first time she'd ever said it out loud. And something in the room shifted, subtle but powerful. The silence, once suffocating, now wrapped around her like armor. She no longer needed to scream to be heard. Her quiet resolve was enough. She didn't have all the answers, and the road ahead was still uncertain. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't living for someone else. She had come home, to herself. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and sadness. Months had passed since she had last set foot in a place like this, but today felt different. She walked the sterile hallway with quiet purpose, each step lighter than the last, as if shedding the weight of everything she had carried for so long. She wasn't here for closure. She had already found that. This visit was for something else, compassion. Alec's sister lay in a hospital bed, pale but peaceful. Tubes curled around her arms like vines, and machines hummed steadily at her side. Her eyes lit up with recognition when she entered. "I didn't think you'd come," the sister said softly. She smiled gently. "I wasn't sure I would." There was a long silence, not awkward, but full of unspoken understanding. "I'm sorry for what my brother did," Alec's sister finally said. Her voice cracked, but her gaze was steady. "You owe me nothing. I never asked him to do any of it." "I know," she replied, her voice just above a whisper. The words washed over her, not as a burden, but as a release. For the first time, she felt truly free. Free from guilt, from obligation, from the idea that her worth was tied to saving someone else. She stood, gave the woman's hand a final squeeze, and walked toward the door. In the hallway, Alec waited. His face was weary, his eyes pleading. But she didn't stop. Not out of anger, but because she finally understood that his choices were his own, and hers were no longer dictated by betrayal. She walked past him without a word, and this time, he didn't try to follow. Outside, the sun was setting over a new skyline. A new city. Her new life. Weeks later, she stood in a quiet laboratory, wearing a white coat with her name stitched proudly across the pocket. The room was filled with microscopes, research journals, and the hum of purposeful work. She had joined a team of genetic researchers studying rare cardiac anomalies. Not because someone needed her to. Not because she was being used. But because she chose this path, for herself, for others like her. She still carried two hearts. That hadn't changed. What had changed was everything else. In her apartment, books lined the shelves, a small balcony overlooked a garden courtyard, and the air felt light with possibility. She no longer searched for love in stolen glances or conditional praise. She had found something greater, self-worth born from survival. In the final scene, she stands on that balcony, dusk painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. She closes her eyes, hand gently resting over her chest. Her voice speaks over the scene, calm and certain, with two hearts, I finally learned to live for one life, mine. And in that moment, everything she had lost found new purpose. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning she was always meant to write. If you enjoyed the story, please ensure to give us a like, share and subscribe. Thank you.